My son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Tomorrow, you need to clear out your bedroom. My wife's parents are moving into your room." He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He didn't say where I was supposed to go. I was standing in the hallway, holding a pillow from my own bed. The cotton case was warm from the dryer. Behind me, I could hear them talking in low, practical voices, already deciding where other people's suitcases would go. No one lowered their voice. No one turned to look at me. I remember staring at the pattern on the wallpaper, the one I chose years ago, and feeling something slip loose inside my chest. In that moment, only one thought ran through my mind, clear and sharp as glass. How could they do this to me? If you want to hear my story until the end, please subscribe to the channel, write which city you're listening from, and keep listening. My name is Nancy. I was 69 the spring my house stopped feeling like mine. I had never been a woman who needed much. A clean kitchen, a steady routine, a little garden out back where the rosemary grew too stubborn to die, those were my luxuries. Still, I had one thing I was proud of, and I earned it the slow way: this house. I bought it decades ago, when interest rates were high and my hair was still dark at the temples. My husband and I signed the papers at a wobbly desk in a bank that smelled like copier toner. We carried our first boxes in ourselves. We argued over paint swatches. We made up. We lived. In the bedroom upstairs, the one Ethan had just told me to empty, I slept beside the man I loved until the day I folded his shirts for the last time. Ethan grew up under this roof. I can still see him in the doorway at 7 years old, holding a model airplane, asking if he could hang it from the ceiling fan. I can still hear his teenage footsteps, too heavy on the stairs, and my own voice calling, "Shoes off, please," like it was the most important rule in the world. When he married Lauren, I told myself I was gaining a daughter. She was pretty in a careful way, polished nails, polite smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes unless she wanted it to. At the wedding, I hugged her and felt the satin of her dress cool against my cheek. She whispered, "We're so lucky to have you," and I believed her because I wanted to. A year later, they came to me with that soft, rehearsed urgency young people use when they're asking for something large. "Mom," Ethan said, hands in his pockets, eyes not quite meeting mine, "we just need a little time. Things are tight. Just for a while." Lauren nodded like it was already settled. "We'll help around the house," she added. "We'll make it easier on you." I was proud of my son. Proud he came to me instead of a bank. Proud I could offer him a landing place. And if I'm honest, I was lonely in a quiet, respectable way. The evenings felt long after my husband was gone. The refrigerator hummed like a tired animal. Their voices in the kitchen sounded like life returning. So I said yes. I cleared the guest room. I brought down extra towels. I made a list of passwords for the Wi-Fi and the security system. I told myself, this is what family does. At first, it almost felt sweet. Ethan fixed a loose hinge on the pantry door. Lauren brought home bright throw pillows that didn't match my sofa but made the living room look like a catalog. They laughed over coffee in the mornings. I listened from the hallway, holding my mug, and I let myself feel useful. But usefulness can sour into something else when people start assuming it will always be there. Small things shifted. My mail went missing for a day, then reappeared opened on the counter. Lauren began rearranging cabinets, to be more efficient, sliding my old mixing bowls to the back like they were clutter. Ethan stopped saying, "your house," and started saying, "the house," as if ownership were a detail that could be edited out. And I tried to stay gracious. I tried to stay the kind of mother who doesn't make waves. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself not to be sensitive. Still, some evenings I stood in my bedroom doorway and looked at the quilt on my bed, the one with faded blue squares my sister helped me stitch, and I felt a thin bitterness rise, quiet and unfamiliar. Pride had carried me a long time. That spring, pride began to taste like metal in my mouth. After my husband died, I kept everything in order: statements, taxes, the deed in a folder that snapped shut in my dresser drawer beneath scarves that still smelled faintly of lavender. Ethan used to be careful with other people's things. As a boy, he'd shovel an elderly neighbor's walk without being asked. That's the Ethan I kept picturing when he and Lauren showed up with their temporary plan. Lauren was polite in a practiced way. At dinner she would smile and say, "Thank you, Nancy," but her eyes moved around the rooms like she was taking measurements. She spoke often about her parents, Harold and Denise, as if their opinions were rules. "My mom says you shouldn't hang on to so much," she'd add, glancing at my bookshelves. Little decisions began happening without me. Ethan and Lauren would talk in low voices at the kitchen table, and when I stepped in, the conversation would stop as neatly as a drawer closing. "Everything okay?" I'd ask. "Oh, sure," Ethan would say too quickly. "We're just planning." Planning. That word started to prickle at the back of my neck. I was still the one paying the property taxes. My name was still on the bills. Yet some evenings, standing at my own sink, I felt like a guest who needed to be grateful for every inch of space. I told myself to stay gracious. I told myself not to be the difficult mother. But pride, slowly, gave way to something sharper, an early bitterness that tasted like metal when I swallowed at night. A few months before Ethan looked at me in that hallway, the first crack came so quietly I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday in late February, the kind of gray day that makes the windows look dirty even when they're clean. I was folding sheets at the dining table, smoothing each corner the way my mother taught me. Lauren leaned against the counter with her phone in hand, scrolling as if my home were just background noise. She watched me for a moment and said, casual as a weather report, "It's not really important where you sleep, is it?" I kept my hands on the sheet, pinching the hem between my fingers. For a second I thought I'd misheard her. The house was quiet except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the clink of Ethan's spoon in his coffee mug. I looked up. "What do you mean?" Lauren shrugged, the smallest lift of one shoulder. "I just mean, you're flexible. You don't need the big room. Ethan and I might need more space eventually. You know, for the future." Ethan didn't look at me. He stared into his mug like there might be answers in the bottom of it. "Lauren's just thinking ahead," he murmured. "Thinking ahead. That's what people say when they're moving chess pieces while you're still setting up the board." I smiled because smiling was my old habit, the one that kept dinners peaceful and holidays on schedule. "I'm fine where I am," I said softly, as if my preference were a small thing. Lauren's eyes flicked past me toward the staircase. "Sure," she said, already done with the topic. After that, the days seemed to tilt. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. It was smaller than that, like sand shifting under a rug. One afternoon I came upstairs and found my bedside lamp gone. Not broken, not packed away, just relocated to the guest room with a different shade, as if it had always belonged there. "Oh, I moved it," Lauren said when I asked. "The lighting in the guest room is terrible." I stood in my doorway, the empty spot on my nightstand looking oddly naked. "Next time, just tell me," I said. She gave me that polished smile. "Of course. I didn't think you'd mind." I started hearing my own name said in a new tone, not Mom, not Nancy, but like a label on a box. "Nancy's curtains are so heavy," Lauren would say to Ethan. "Nancy's dresser takes up a lot of space." Always spoken as if I weren't within earshot, even when I was. Then my dresser actually moved. One Saturday morning I walked upstairs and found Ethan pushing it away from the wall while Lauren directed him, arms folded, pointing to where it should go. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Lauren didn't pause. "We're making the room more functional." "My room," I corrected, before I could stop myself. Ethan wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Mom, we're not trying to upset you. It's just furniture." But it wasn't just furniture. It was the feeling of my life being handled without my consent, like someone sorting through a drawer of old letters and deciding what mattered. A week later, the curtains were replaced. My thick, cream-colored panels, chosen to keep the morning sun from bleaching the quilt, were gone. In their place hung sheer, modern drapes that let the light spill in too early, too bright. Lauren stood back, pleased. "It looks cleaner," she said. "More updated." I touched the fabric. It felt thin, temporary, like tissue paper. "Where are my curtains?" "In the basement," she replied. I didn't throw them away. As if that were generous. That night I lay awake listening to the house settle, the pipes ticking softly. The moonlight slid through the new shears and fell across my dresser drawer where the deed folder sat underneath scarves that smelled of lavender. I stared at that pale strip of light and felt unease spread through me, cold and patient. Because I understood something then that I hadn't wanted to say out loud. They were practicing. They were learning what they could take, and how quietly they could take it, before I finally made a sound. The next morning my jewelry dish, my mother's porcelain one with a blue rim, was missing from my dresser. I found it on the kitchen windowsill, filled with spare change. Lauren glanced up when I held it. "Oh, I needed a place for coins." "Isn't that cute?" "Multi-purpose." I rinsed it, watching suds slide over the chipped edge. "Please don't take things from my room," I said. Ethan sighed. "Mom, it's just a dish. Just a dish. Just a lamp. Just curtains." The word just began to sound like a broom sweeping me out inch by inch. That afternoon, I opened my banking app to pay the utilities and noticed a new email address listed under notifications. It wasn't mine. It ended with Lauren's name. I took a screenshot, changed the setting back, and wrote the date on a sticky note I hid in my recipe binder. Then I sat at the table and listened to them upstairs moving things, thuds, drawers sliding, like my life being rearranged as I stayed quiet. After the day I noticed the changes in my banking app, I began to move through the house differently. I walked more slowly, as if the floors might warn me what would be taken next. In the mornings I set the kettle on and listened to it hiss, but I wasn't really listening to the water anymore. I was listening for footsteps upstairs. My things started disappearing in ways that didn't invite an argument, only doubt. First it was the box of buttons I kept in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. I searched carefully, the way you do when you don't want to make a mess in someone else's house. Then my old wooden hanger vanished, the one that held my only proper suit. When I asked, Lauren didn't look up from her phone. "We were tidying up," she said. "There was a lot you didn't need." Didn't need. The word sat between us like a threshold I was no longer meant to cross. They began bringing people over without warning. 2 of Ethan's friends stopped by, for a minute, and stayed for hours, their feet stretched out on my coffee table. Lauren once walked a woman through the house and later called her, just a consultant, but she pointed at rooms the way people do when they imagine ownership. I stood in the kitchen with wet hands and a towel, listening as Lauren said, "This room has the best light." I knew which room she meant before she finished the sentence. One evening I went upstairs and found new pillows on my bed, shiny and unfamiliar. My faded blue quilt was folded at the foot, tucked away like something that spoiled the picture. On the windowsill stood a candle that smelled aggressively of vanilla, so sweet it made my head ache. "Do you like it?" Lauren asked from the doorway. Her voice was pleasant, but there was no question in it. "It's different," I said. She smiled. "We're just refreshing the space." "We." When Lauren said "we," she meant herself and Ethan. I was no longer included. I began leaving quiet markers, the way people do when they sense something is wrong. I took photos of closets so I would remember how things were arranged. I wrote down dates when papers moved. I kept the key to my document drawer in the pocket of my robe, feeling its cold weight against my hip like a small anchor. One afternoon I came back from the pharmacy and found my photo album stacked near the stairs, their corners worn. Lauren said, "I thought they'd be better downstairs. We need the space up here." I lifted one album. On the first page was Ethan at 7, missing a tooth, serious as anything. My hands shook, not with anger but with humiliation. My memories were being boxed and relocated so they wouldn't interfere. That night I sat in the small downstairs room they called an office. It smelled of dust and old paper. I looked at the closed door upstairs and understood I was no longer the owner. I was temporary. The realization came quietly, like a draft under the door. The next morning I found my old calendar in the trash, crumpled among coffee filters. I smoothed it out and felt a thought form that I wasn't ready to say aloud. If I stayed silent, they would learn not to hear me at all. And the shame I felt was not for them. It was for myself. The day did not announce itself as important. It slipped in quietly, dressed like any other afternoon, and that made it harder to defend myself against it. I was standing in the hallway with a pillow in my arms when Ethan stopped in front of me. The pillowcase was still warm, faintly smelling of detergent and sun from the line in the yard. I had just taken it from my bed, thinking only of fresh sheets and small routines that still belonged to me. He didn't sit down. He didn't smile. He looked at me the way people look at a task they've already decided to complete. "Tomorrow, you need to clear out your bedroom," he said. "Lauren's parents are moving into your room." The words landed without mercy. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He didn't say my name. I waited, foolishly, for something else to follow. For him to lower his voice. For him to say he was sorry. For him to ask where I would go. But he was already done. I tightened my fingers around the pillow. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked. Ethan exhaled, slow and tired. "We'll figure something out. It's just for now. Just for now." The phrase had been used so often it had lost all meaning, like a coin rubbed smooth. Behind me, Lauren's voice floated down from upstairs, brisk and efficient. "The big suitcase should go near the window," she said. "They'll want the light." They were already planning. Already placing other people into the space where my life had lived. I turned and walked up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself were resisting me. My bedroom door was open. Inside, 2 large suitcases stood at the foot of my bed. Dark. Solid. Confident. They did not belong to anyone I knew. My dresser had been pushed farther toward the wall. The lamp was gone. My quilt was folded on a chair like an afterthought. The vanilla candle burned on the windowsill again, its sweetness thick in the air, pressing down on my chest. Lauren stood near the closet, checking something on her phone. She glanced up and smiled. "We didn't have much time," she said. "I hope that's okay." I looked at Ethan. He stared at the floor. In that moment, clarity arrived, sharp and cold. This was not confusion. This was not an accident. This had been discussed, agreed upon, and carried out without me. My silence had been mistaken for consent. I stepped farther into the room and ran my hand along the edge of the bed. The wood was smooth from years of use. I remembered lying there beside my husband, listening to his breathing slow at night. I remembered mornings when sunlight touched the quilt first, waking us gently. I remembered grief, and learning how to sleep alone, and learning how to wake up again. All of it lived here. And now I was being removed from it as if none of that mattered. No one raised their voice. No one apologized. The house hummed softly around us, indifferent. I lifted my quilt and held it against my chest. It was heavier than I expected, weighted with years, with care, with endurance. Then I turned and walked back downstairs. The small room waited. The one they called temporary. I laid the quilt on the narrow bed and sat down slowly. Above me, drawers opened. Suitcases rolled. Laughter rose and fell. I sat very still, listening. Inside me, something screamed, not wildly, not loudly, but steadily, like a warning bell that could no longer be ignored. This was not about a bedroom. This was about whether I still existed in my own life. That night I did not go back upstairs. I stayed in the small downstairs room they called the office, the one with the narrow bed and the old filing cabinet that squeaked when you opened it. The air smelled like dust, printer paper, and the faint lemon cleaner I used on Saturdays. I could hear the refrigerator cycling in the kitchen, the plumbing settling, and, above all of it, the muted thumps of people moving into my life. I sat on the edge of the bed with my quilt folded across my lap. The fabric was worn smooth where my hands had worried it over the years. I traced one faded blue square with my fingertip and tried to slow my breathing the way I used to after a hard phone call from the hospital. Upstairs, a suitcase rolled across the floor. A drawer slid open. Lauren laughed, light and pleased, and I heard a man's voice, Harold, I assumed, say, "This will do just fine." "This will do," I repeated under my breath, and my throat tightened. I stared at the closed door at the top of the stairs as if it were a stranger's door. It was still my house. My name was still on the deed. Yet the simple truth pressed in on me, in their minds, ownership had already changed hands. They were acting it out until it became real. I got up and walked to the kitchen. The overhead light made everything look too honest, the crumb tray, the dish towel with the tiny tear, my favorite mug with a hairline crack in the handle. On the counter lay a stack of mail that had been opened. My utility bill sat on top, folded back as if someone had checked the amount. I didn't touch it. I just looked. Then I opened the drawer where I kept a small notebook and wrote the date. March 18th. I wrote what Ethan had said, word for word. I wrote what Lauren had said about the suitcase by the window. My pen made a soft scratching sound, steady as rain on glass. When I finished, I went to my bedroom dresser in my mind, the bottom drawer where the deed folder used to sit beneath my lavender scarves. I pictured someone else's hand there, confident, sorting, deciding. The image made my stomach turn, but it also did something else. It clarified. If I accepted this, I would be teaching them that I could be moved like a lamp. Today it was my bedroom. Tomorrow it would be the accounts, the mail, the decisions about my health. Next time, I would not even be informed. I would simply discover my life had been managed without my consent. I had spent years being careful not to burden anyone. I had been the soft place for other people to land. But softness, I finally understood, is not the same as surrender. I returned to the little room and closed the door. I opened my phone and checked my banking app again, slowly, with the calm of a woman balancing a checkbook. The unfamiliar email address was still there in the notification history. The attempted password change was still logged, stamped with a time. Evidence does not argue. It just sits, patient and plain. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself. Then I opened the Notes app and made a list: deed, insurance, accounts, mailbox key, spare house key, documents in the file cabinet, my will. Not dramatic. Not vengeful. Procedural. I set the phone down and listened to the house. Upstairs, someone ran water. Someone turned on the television. Life continued as if I had already been packed away. That was when the cold clarity arrived fully, clean as winter air. If I stayed and swallowed this, there would be nothing left of me to protect. And I did not survive all those years, marriage, loss, work, saving, paying, just to be quietly erased in my own home. I opened the filing cabinet beside the bed. The drawer stuck, then gave with a dry complaint. Inside were folders I hadn't touched in months: taxes, home, medical, Ethan, school. I pulled out the home folder and held it against my knees, feeling the thick paper edges and the familiar weight of responsibility. There was my homeowner's policy, the last property tax receipt, and a photo of the front porch from the year I refinished the steps myself. On the table sat a small bowl of keys. I tipped it and let them slide into my palm: mailbox, shed, the spare house key I'd once given Ethan, for emergencies. The metal was cool, steadying. I thought about how easily a key can be copied, how quietly a lock can be changed. Upstairs, someone opened my closet door. I heard hangers scrape. I pictured a stranger's hand lifting my blouses, deciding what belonged, what didn't. The image didn't ignite rage. It ignited something cleaner: refusal. I looked around the little room. It wasn't punishment. It was information. They had shown me exactly where they believed I belonged, out of the way, grateful, quiet. I whispered, no. Not as a threat. As a fact. I could almost hear my husband's voice from years ago, gentle but firm, Nancy, don't disappear. I hadn't disappeared then. I wasn't going to start now, not in the place I built. Not for anyone, now. I began packing before sunrise, not because I was fleeing, but because mornings have always been mine. The house was quiet in that thin hour when even the refrigerator seemed to hum more softly. A streetlight threw a pale stripe across the kitchen floor. I made tea in my chipped mug, the one with the hairline crack, and drank it standing at the counter as if I were borrowing space from myself. I did not slam drawers. I did not throw things into bags. I moved the way I used to move when Ethan was small and sleeping, careful, deliberate, respectful of my own dignity. I told myself, out is not defeat. Out is a boundary. First I gathered documents. The deed copy from the folder. My passport. The insurance papers. The little envelope of birth certificates and my marriage license that every woman keeps, even when she tells herself she won't need it again. I slid everything into a plain canvas tote and zipped it closed, then held it like I once held groceries. Before I touched a single sweater, I sat at the table and opened my phone. The screen glow made my hands look older than they felt. I changed my banking password, removed every notification address that wasn't mine, and turned on two-step verification. At 8 a.m. I called the bank and asked them to note my account, no added users without my signature. The woman on the line said, understood, and I exhaled. Then I opened the closet in the downstairs room and pulled out a suitcase I hadn't used since my husband's last trip to the coast. The wheels squeaked when I rolled it across the floor. That sound, small and embarrassed, made my eyes sting for a moment, but I blinked it away. Tears were allowed later. Decisions came first. I packed 3 outfits, my winter scarf, the lavender sachet I kept in my drawer, and the framed photo of my husband and me on our porch, taken in 1998 when the steps were still new. I took my pill organizer and my checkbook, my reading glasses, and the worn paperback I'd been halfway through. I left the rest for now. If I tried to take everything, I would lose time and composure. I needed both. At 7, Ethan came downstairs in socks, hair messy, rubbing his face like a tired boy. He stopped when he saw the suitcase. Mom, what are you doing? I'm packing, I said. He frowned, already defensive. You don't have to be dramatic. I held his gaze. This isn't drama. This is me taking care of myself. Lauren appeared behind him, perfectly awake, phone in hand. She scanned the suitcase and the tote like she was reading a list. Where are you going? She asked, not kindly, not cruelly, simply as if the answer were an inconvenience. A place where I'm not asked to shrink, I said. Ethan's jaw tightened. Mom, we said we'd figure something out. You can stay in the office for a bit. It's not the end of the world. I set my mug in the sink. The porcelain clicked against metal, a clean, final sound. It's not the office, I said. It's what it means. You gave away my room without asking. You opened my mail. You added an email to my accounts. You moved my things as if they were clutter. Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. We were just trying to make the house work. The house already worked, I said. I built it. I paid for it. And I was willing to share it, until sharing became removal. Ethan's voice rose a notch. So what, you're going to punish us? Walk out and make us look bad? I shook my head. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm refusing to stay where I'm treated like an accessory. I picked up the spare house key from the bowl and held it in my palm. For a second I remembered giving it to Ethan years ago, the day he left for college. For emergencies, I'd said. I placed it on the table between us. You won't have this anymore, I told him. Not because I hate you. Because I have to protect myself. His eyes flashed. Protect yourself from what? We're family. Family doesn't evict you from your own bed, I said, quietly. I zipped the suitcase. The sound was ordinary, but it cut through the room like a line drawn in ink. Then I did what I had been afraid to do for months. I walked to the front door and took my keys from the hook, feeling each tooth of metal against my fingertips. Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it. Ethan looked suddenly younger, like the boy in the photo albums. For a moment I wondered if he would stop me. He didn't. On the porch, the air was cold and clean. My breath came out in a white cloud. I turned back once, not to plead, but to memorize the house as it truly was, mine in law, no longer mine in spirit. I'll communicate in writing from now on, I said. About the house and the bills. I set my phone on silent, slid my notebook into my purse, and drove to a small rented room across town. I paid $89 for the night cash and slept. Not well, but it was mine. Yet. Then I stepped off the porch, pulled my coat tighter, and walked to my car with the steady pace of a woman choosing herself. The consequences did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. They came the way truth usually does, slowly, through inconvenience and discomfort, through things not working the way people expected them to. Lauren's parents stayed longer than planned. Then longer still. The office became a storage room. The living room filled with tension instead of laughter. The house, I was later told, began to feel crowded in a way no amount of refreshing could fix. The first call came 3 weeks after I left. It was Ethan. His voice sounded different, thinner, like he was speaking from a room with bad acoustics. "Mom," he said, and paused too long. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, calm and careful. He told me the house felt smaller. That argument started over trivial things, thermostats, dishes, noise at night. Lauren's parents criticized everything, from the plumbing to the grocery brands. They asked why certain bills were so high. They asked whose name was actually on the deed. "They keep saying it's temporary," Ethan said, frustration slipping through. "But it doesn't feel like it." I said nothing. Silence is sometimes the most honest mirror. A week later, Lauren called. She didn't greet me. She went straight to the point. "We didn't realize how complicated things would get," she said. "We thought you'd be more flexible." I said. Until flexibility became erasure. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "Ethan misses you." "I miss my son," I said. "I don't miss being ignored." After that, the calls came closer together. Ethan spoke about the noise, the lack of privacy, the constant feeling of being evaluated in his own kitchen. He asked about the bills. He asked about the insurance. He asked questions he had never needed to ask when I was there quietly holding everything together. One evening he said, "I didn't know how much you handled." "That's the problem," I replied gently. "You didn't need to know. Until you did." I learned from a neighbor that a moving truck had come and gone. Lauren's parents left earlier than expected. No celebration. No farewell dinner. Just departure. Ethan called the next day. His voice broke when he said my name. "I messed up," he said. "I thought I was building a future. I didn't see what I was tearing down." I let him speak. I let the silence do its work when he ran out of words. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have asked. I should have protected you." I didn't need protection, I told him. I needed respect. He asked if we could meet. Not to fix everything. Just to talk. I agreed. Not because the past could be undone, but because consequences don't always mean permanent distance. Sometimes they mean clarity earned the hard way. When we met, he looked older. Not aged by time, but by understanding. He listened more than he spoke. Lauren did not come. No one begged. No one promised miracles. There was only the quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost, and what could never again be taken for granted. Justice did not look like revenge. It looked like recognition. My new life did not begin with a celebration. It began with small, ordinary choices that belonged only to me. I rented a modest apartment across town, 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, with a narrow balcony that faced a line of old maple trees. The first night I stayed there, the radiator clicked and knocked like it was clearing its throat. I lay awake listening, not afraid, just attentive. The quiet felt earned. I unpacked slowly. I placed my lavender sachets in the dresser. I set my chipped mug on the counter. I hung the photo of my husband and me on the porch wall, where the afternoon light softened our faces. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was moved without my consent. I learned the rhythms of the place. The woman downstairs watered her plants every morning at 7. A bus sighed at the corner every half hour. On Sundays, the smell of someone else's cooking drifted through the hall and reminded me that life continued, even when it changed shape. I told myself I was not starting over. I was continuing, with clearer boundaries. I volunteered twice a week at the library, shelving books and helping people find what they were looking for. There was comfort in that. Order without control. Service without erasure. The librarian learned my name and said it kindly, like it mattered. I took walks in the evenings, my scarf wrapped just so, my keys warm in my pocket. I noticed how my shoulders dropped when no one was rearranging my world behind my back. I slept through the night more often than not. Ethan called sometimes. Not too much. Not too little. Our conversations were careful, but honest. He no longer assumed. He asked. "How are you really?" he said once. "I'm steady," I answered. And I was. I did not rush forgiveness. I did not withhold it like a weapon either. I let it come in its own time, shaped by changed behavior, not words alone. The house remained in my name. The paperwork was clean. The boundaries were clear. That knowledge rested in me like a stone at the bottom of a river, solid, unmoving, mine. I began to understand something important: dignity is not loud. It does not announce itself. It shows up in how you arrange your days, how you protect your sleep, how you say no without shaking. I was no longer afraid of being alone. I was afraid only of returning to silence that cost me myself. And that fear, finally, was useful. In my new bedroom, the light came in gently. No vanilla candle tried to erase me. No suitcase waited at the foot of the bed. Only my quilt, my breath, and the quiet understanding that I had chosen myself. That balance, earned, imperfect, real, was enough. My son asked me to leave my bedroom so other people could move in, and for a long time I thought that was the thing I lost. I thought I had lost comfort, history, the shape of my old life. But time has a way of sorting truth from fear. What I really lost was an illusion. The illusion that love means staying quiet. The illusion that being a good mother requires shrinking. The illusion that endurance is the same thing as dignity. In my new apartment, I wake when I want to. I make my tea slowly. I open the window even in winter, just an inch, to let in clean air. No one rearranges my mornings. No one decides what space I deserve. Ethan and I speak now with care. There is distance, but also honesty. He knows I will not disappear for the sake of peace. I know he is learning what respect costs when it arrives late. I do not hate him. I do not punish him. I simply live differently now. Some nights I unfold my quilt and think about the woman I was when I first stitched it, hopeful, certain, unaware of how easily a life can be taken for granted. I wish I could tell her one thing: you are allowed to choose yourself, even when it's hard. If this story touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. And tonight, as I turn off the light and settle into my bed, I sleep peacefully, not because everything is perfect, but because I am finally on my own side.